teens have an amazing capacity to think about things in new and different ways. They're able to think outside the box, question the status quo. They have innovative ideas and inventions that come from the creative thoughts of having a teen mind. Their developmental stage actually leads them to think outside the box more often. It's related to that novelty seeking that we talked about. It also leads them to a very specific developmental experience that may cause them to ask some really big existential questions. So if you find, especially in the late teen, going into late teen and college years, you may find your teen asking a lot of deep questions. Maybe they are spiritual, maybe they are thinking more about the world, about their place in the world. And these can be kind of unsettling for them, but they are developmentally appropriate. And so anytime you can just be a supportive adult when they're kind of hanging out in that space of asking these big questions, that's a really huge gift to them. Okay, next slide. And you can click through so we can see all of these. These are, again, from Dan Siegel. These are tasks of adolescence. And so identity development, often that comes starting in junior high. And you've probably already seen this in your home, that they go through a stage where they're trying to figure out who they are, and they need to have the freedom to experience different interests, styles, hobbies, friends, beliefs, and they need some amount of flexibility from you to let them try on these identities, as long as they're reasonably within the value structure of your family. Let them try them on, try them out. Some of them won't fit. That's okay. So if they like something one week and not the next, just let them figure that out. They are bumping up against their own personality, their own identity, and it helps them develop a strong sense of self going into adulthood. Autonomy, the whole purpose of adolescence is for them to move from being a dependent child to an independent adult. So autonomy is all about balancing responsibility with privilege and freedom. So letting them gain that in developmentally appropriate doses. And when you see, okay, they weren't ready for that much freedom, then you can pare that back and say, okay, I see they need a little more practice before they have that amount of freedom. Relationships, we talked about that. Empathy, teens start to develop more empathy for other people, not as much as adults typically have, but they're a little less egocentric and self-centered than younger kids. Metacognition, which is thinking about their thinking. Morality, we talked a little bit about that in these existential questions that they have. And they kind of start to develop their own worldview with their own sense of values. And I encourage parents to believe that even as their teens are asking these questions, and even as they're seeming more peer-centric, you still have a huge influence on their worldview and how they think about themselves, their place in the world, and their values. So, okay, next slide. Coping skills. So as we just said, we know that anxiety is healthy as long as it does not outpace a person's ability to cope with the anxiety. So we're going to focus for just a moment here on building coping skills so that even when anxiety is there, teens feel like they have the resources to address it. Okay, next slide is just the definition of coping. Coping can be defined as finding positive and healthy ways to manage stress and problem solve during hard times. So next slide is what's called the cognitive triangle. And it shows that our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are all connected. And when we change or improve one point on the triangle, it positively impacts the other two. It's all connected. So we actually have the power to influence our own feeling. Now, we don't have a lot of direct control over our emotions. Our emotions are what we're feeling in a given moment. And they come and they go. And we're going to talk more about that. But what we can do is influence our feelings by changing our thoughts and our behaviors. Okay, so next is thoughts, and we can just click right on through to thinking traps. So, our critic voice can lead us into some thinking traps that can affect our beliefs and attitudes. And these include things like mind reading, which is believing you already know what other people are thinking. And teens do this a lot. They believe that everyone else is thinking about what they're thinking about. They also engage in fortune telling, which is arbitrarily predicting how things are going to turn out. All or nothing thinking is when they start using words like always and never. And by the way, this is a really useful communication tool, I think, for people of all ages. When you're talking to someone and you're using words like always or never, typically that invites people into conflict rather than into problem solving. If you're saying you always leave your dishes in your room, you never take out the trash, that person is immediately going to go to thinking about the one time they didn't do that just to prove that point. So it's so much more inviting if you can say, hey, I've noticed that sometimes this isn't getting done. So if you can just notice when you're using all or nothing, and when you hear a teen say, I'll never make this team, I'll never pass math, that's a time to really start to challenge that and just put a little space between them and that all or nothing thought. Catastrophizing is taking something small and blowing it out of proportion, like one bad grade means I'm going to fail this whole class. An imaginary audience means we sometimes think everyone is watching us, noticing all of our mistakes and constantly judging us, when in reality, we know that most people, especially in high school, most people are focused on themselves. But teens feel like there's a spotlight on them all day, every day. Personalization or blame. When you notice that your teen is maybe overly blaming themselves for something that maybe wasn't entirely their responsibility, like saying, oh, it's all my fault, I did this all wrong. Or sometimes more often, if they're pushing away all responsibility into blaming others, overlooking ways that their own actions or attitudes might have contributed to the problem. And I always think personalization or blame are really good red flags that a person has shifted into shame. And if you've ever read or heard Brene Brown, you know that shame-based thinking leads us into some really dark places and does not invite connection. And so when you hear your teen blaming themselves or others in a disproportionate way, notice that they're probably in shame. And labeling means using words that really over-personalize a mistake. Instead of saying, I made a mistake, saying, I'm stupid, I'm a jerk, I'm no good at this, I'll never be good at this. So taking the personalization out of it, instead of saying, I am, say what you did. Okay, so next slide. How do we deal with these kinds of negative thoughts? So really, one of the first things we can do is just notice that we've fallen into one of these thought patterns, or notice that our teen has fallen into one of these thought patterns. And just noticing it is actually a really important step in starting to make a small shift in their thinking. Once we notice we're in a thinking trap, we can start to develop just a little bit of self-compassion and find ways to recenter our thinking. And when we hear our teens in those kinds of thinking traps, we can bring some compassion to those thoughts and those conversations to let them know that maybe they're thinking of things in an exaggerated way. Okay, next slide. How do we shift from that critical mindset to more of a coach mindset. And that's the time that we are reminded that we have strengths that can help us cope with difficulty. So if you'll click one more time, Ashley, it'll show us some of the thought patterns that can help combat those negative thought patterns. I'm capable. You know, you have skills and knowledge. You're smart. You make good choices. You have skills, even if you don't have all the skills that you will eventually have. You're in the process of learning the skills. I'm experienced. I've been through something hard before and I managed it. I can do this. It's like building a muscle. When I do something hard, I get stronger. I can make wise choices. People are around to protect and encourage you. You have choices. You don't have to continue making the same mistakes again and again. You have choices about your friends. You have helpers. You have people who care about you and want you to be successful. Parents, teachers, coaches, friends are there to support you when you're struggling. Those people want to help. So it's normal to be upset or angry or scared in certain situations. But healthy thinking looks at the whole situation, recognizes there can be a proportionate amount of feeling upset or scared, and that's okay. It's healthy. But then you can start to shift that thinking just a little bit into more of a growth mindset. So you can notice, shift, and actually move toward rewiring your brain. Okay, so next slide. When you notice and shift from the critic to the coach, you can actually help rewire your brain or your teen's brain. As we said before, the teen brain is always forming new pathways. Their brains connect and rewire faster than adults. So we know that what fires together wires together. So when they make a mistake, if they can shift from I'm a failure to a more compassionate, I'm going to do that differently next time, or shifting from this is hard or this is too hard for me, shifting them just a little into this is hard and I know I can do hard things and I have done hard things before. So that's just a way to kind of put a little bit of room between them and their negative thought. Okay, so the next slide is these are some of the questions we can ask ourselves or our teens that might help them notice if they've fallen into one of these thinking traps, like all or nothing thinking or catastrophizing or mind reading. So I have a really important warning about this, which is if you are trying to engage with a teen with these kinds of questions, these are all questions that appeal to the logic, frontal cortex part of a person's brain. If you are talking to a teen who is dysregulated, asking them any of these questions will not be helpful. In fact, it will probably send them into a more negative mindset and may result in conflict. Because when a teen has lost it, we have to start with regulation. They cannot have a reasonable conversation when they are upset and dysregulated, and neither can we as adults. When we are angry or upset, the first thing we have to do is re-regulate ourselves. So that means doing many of the same things that we did when we had a crying child. We can approach them with soft words, deep breaths, calm tones, attending to their physical needs. Do they need water? Do they need food? Do they need warmth? Maybe they have a lot of physical energy and you're seeing that because they're throwing things around. Maybe they need to bounce a basketball for a while. They need a healthy outlet for that energy. When they're in that state, there is no way that they can engage in relating to you or in coming up with a reasonable solution to the problem. They just need to re-regulate. After they have found their way back to a regulated state, then you can spend some time connecting with them. Then is the stage for relating. So we regulate, then we relate, and then we can go into reason. So after they've regulated, the relating stage means a lot of reflective listening without trying to change anything. This is the time for curiosity, but not judgment. This is the time when they may be able to tell you what's upsetting them, but they're probably not really ready to work on solving the problem yet. So if you can bring yourself to just hang out there with them for a little while and just relating, just saying, that sounds really, really hard. It sounds like you tried really hard to do the right thing and it didn't work out the way you wanted to. Just a lot of reflective listening. And then after you've regulated and related, then we can go on to reasoning. Then you can help them start to reason through the problem. And whenever it's possible, it usually works better if you can frame problem solving as you and your team working together against a problem, rather than you on one side of the problem and your team on the other side of the problem. Even when you know in your adult experience that you have a solution that would be effective for their problem, such as if you put everything in your backpack the night before school, you would less likely forget things, mornings would be smoother. You may know a really great solution to something that is not going well in their life. But when you tell them that solution, sometimes that sets up an opportunity for them to push back against that solution, tell you all the reasons why that solution won't work for them. It puts them in their, I don't want you telling me what to do brain. But if instead you can frame it as, it sounds like it's really hard when you get to school and you don't have what you need, and it really messes up your whole day. Let's try to think together about a system that might work for you. What do you think would help you? When you approach it like that, you have engaged their problem-solving brain, and they're less likely to push back against your idea for a solution. You might have an opportunity to work with them to offer some ideas. But if they come up with the solution, they get that shot of dopamine, that sense of pride that they figured out how to do it. And then later on in life, when they encounter a problem, they know, hey, I can come up with a solution that can help this go better next time. Okay, so next slide is an example that we give when we do presentations about the brain to students. We give them this scenario to help them recognize when they're having some of those negative thoughts, some of that catastrophizing. You got your math exam back today. You really thought you did well. When the test came back, you did not get a good grade. So they may go into a thought of, I'm bad at math, or this teacher doesn't like me, or I'm never going to get through this class. So those are global thoughts. And so what we want to do is just help bring them into thinking that's a little more compassionate. Is there evidence that maybe something else was going on? Maybe you understand a lot of concepts in math, but this particular concept is hard for you. Maybe something else went on in this quiz. Maybe you just really didn't have time to go over the material the way that you usually do. Maybe something was distracting you during this quiz. Are there any other possible explanations? So it just kind of helps increase their flexible thinking just a little bit. And then the next slide is an example where this could happen to someone as an adult. You're in a staff meeting, you share an idea that you think is a really great idea. This one is targeted toward people who work in schools. You think you have a good idea, and the whole team just kind of moves on and didn't really pay attention to your idea. And so you may be having the thought, Nobody liked this idea. I'm just not even going to try to share again next time. But if you can increase that flexible thinking just a little bit and say, maybe there are other reasons. Maybe for some reason, people were just focused on their own, trying to have their own ideas in that moment and just couldn't shift their mind into really hearing my idea. Maybe there's another reason that it just didn't get the traction that particular time that you thought it should have. And just try to have a little more compassion for yourself. Okay, the next slide means that we are going to next talk about emotions. Remember, we talked about thinking, behavior, and emotions all being connected in our cognitive triangle. So emotions in the next slide is a feelings wheel. And so emotions can be tricky. Not all emotions feel pleasant, but we all experience emotions. And if you've seen the Inside Out movies 1 and 2, they do such a beautiful job of depicting how we really do need the full range of human emotion. Sometimes we just need to sit in sadness before we can go on to feeling happy again. I think that's one of the most beautiful examples in popular culture of how we really do just have to feel our emotions. If we try to short circuit them, they come back in other ways that are confusing, and it's harder to deal with them then. So it's really important to let our teens sit in uncomfortable feelings and not try to rescue them from them. And this is another place where we can think about if we're trying to escape negative feelings by numbing them, that limits our ability to actually cope with tough times. And feelings are not good or bad, right or wrong. They are normal and necessary. So feelings wheels are helpful because they can help us put a name to our emotion, which sounds simple, and sometimes it is, but sometimes our emotions are complex, and one feeling may be masking another feeling. If we're feeling inferior, we might act angry. If we're feeling embarrassed, we might make jokes or act silly or act like we don't care. If we're capable of sitting in our feelings and identifying what's really going on, that gives us really useful information about what's happening and what we can do about it. Our feelings are usually trying to tell us something about whether an environment is safe, about who we believe we can trust, about what we believe about ourselves, how we perceive a situation when we're stressed, what needs attention in our life. If we're feeling stressed, maybe it's because we actually haven't been studying for math and should have been. It can give us really useful information. So if we can take that information and decide what to do with the information, we can act on it and we can decide how to move forward in a healthy way. Or if we just need to talk to someone and wait for that feeling to pass. So the next slide just recaps what we talked about in the last slide. When we're having a strong feeling, if we can name it, feel it, and then decide what would be a good way to approach it, either talking to someone, working out some physical energy. What do we need to do to feel better? Okay, the next slide is behavior. One of the most important things that I talk about in my practice is that all behavior is communication. So sometimes when we see our teens' behavior, it does not make sense to us. But if we can see what they're doing as coming from a place that is logical to them in that moment. Now, maybe not logical coming from their prefrontal cortex, but logical from their survival brain. That behavior feels like self-preservation to them. So if we can see their behavior through the lens of communication, it can help us step back and ask, what is this behavior trying to tell me or trying to tell others around them? Okay, and the next slide is about sleep. Perhaps the most important thing that I work with my teen clients on is thinking about how much sleep they get every night. And the numbers on this slide are actually a little bit outdated. We really now know that teens need more like 9 to 11 hours of sleep. As we can see, 70% of teens do not get that. And that data is also old. My guess is that it's worse now. Sleep is literally the glue that holds human beings together. That is another quote from Lisa D'Amour. It is essential to helping our brains function. And it's really essential for teens because when we are sleep deprived, as we all know, our emotions are more intense. And so when teens have enough sleep, even though they experience emotions more intensely or they have an impulse to make a risky decision, sleep helps them slow down and make a better decision. And so we know that it is the best gift you can give your teen is helping them build good sleep skills. And in the next slide, we talk about some habits that build good sleep skills. And Ashley, you can just click through so we can see them all. We mostly all already know these things. We know how to have good sleep hygiene, teens and adults. And yet it is a really difficult thing to do, often for both teens and adults. So even though we know turning screens off before bed, getting natural light during the day, getting some movement in our day, having a consistent bedtime routine, not having the phone by the bed, we all know that helps. But why is it so difficult to do? So it is okay if your teen is showing you that they don't yet have the skill to have a phone next to their bed. If they're staying on their phone until 1 or 2 in the morning, their behavior is communicating to you, I don't have the self-control yet to do this. I don't have these skills yet. I need you to help scaffold these skills for me. So what they're saying is they need you to help. Whatever that means in your family. Maybe that means taking the phone out of the room. Maybe that means unplugging the Wi-Fi at a certain time. Whatever boundaries you can set to help them succeed. And then slowly let them try to build the skill of knowing when they need to get away from the screen, when they need to turn off the TV. That's it's hard, and it's hard for adults too. We all know it. So we can also have some empathy for our teens that they are being approached with an algorithm that is designed to overwhelm them. So they are responsible for their choice, but they've been given some really difficult tools to work around. Mindfulness, most of you probably have heard of mindfulness. It's just an effort to kind of bring yourself back into the current moment, bring yourself back into where you are right now. Anxiety is so much about dwelling on the future, and depression is so much about feeling hopeless. So if we can bring ourselves just into the present moment and ground ourselves, that can help us tackle what comes next. The next slide is my favorite breathing technique that I teach to my clients. It's square breathing, and you can see we just inhale for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, and hold it for 4 seconds. If you can do that about 4 times in a row, it usually helps calm your body. I will tell you that most teens who come into my office start out by saying, yeah. Counselors love to talk about breathing. Breathing is not going to help solve my problem. And so I own that with them. You are right. Breathing isn't going to change the fact that your friend has said something unkind, that you're struggling in math. But what breathing does do is regulate you. So it's the first step. And it's because the same thing that causes our amygdala to cause our breathing to become shallow and fast if we're having a panic attack, those same neuroreceptors on your lungs can send a message back to your amygdala. You're breathing, you're safe, you're okay. So it starts the process of feeling regulated. Like, currently I am in safety, or I would not be breathing this way. Then you can move into problem solving. Okay. And the next slide is a mindfulness activity that you may have heard of, which is just kind of grounding yourself in the place where you are. 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 things you hear, 2 things you smell, 1 thing you taste. It just engages your senses to bring you into your current place of being and remind you that you are currently safe. So the next slide is just revisiting the cognitive triangle. So we've seen how our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are all connected. When we change or improve one point on the triangle, it positively impacts the other 2 or negatively impacts the other 2. But the important thing is that we have some amount of power and autonomy to change how we are approaching life and how we're coping with difficult situations. So next is just a recap. Teen brains are still developing, and that's a good thing. Resilience is something we all have, and it can be built over time. It's like building a muscle. It's hard the first few times, but it gets easier the more they do it. And the more that process is not disrupted by being rescued from a difficult situation, either by over intervention from a parent or by a substance. We all have the power to recognize our thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and work together to have better life experiences. The next slide is a really good resource from the Grant Halliburton Foundation. Here for Texas is a warm line, which means it's not a hotline. It is not available 24/7, but Monday through Friday, I think it's maybe 10 to 5, where you can call and get resources if you're looking for more support for you or your family. The Grant Halliburton Foundation developed this resource to help families find support when they need it. The next slide is some book recommendations. One of those is by Dan Siegel, or 2 of those are actually by Dan Siegel that I referenced throughout the presentation. Another book that I referenced, I don't know if you guys can see me, but it's Lisa D'Amour, who wrote The Emotional Lives of Teenagers. So that is a resource that I use a lot. And so thank you all so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all today. I don't know if we have time for any questions, Ashley.
Sorry, I realized I was on mute. Yes, as long as you do. We have a couple of minutes.
Sure, I do. Yeah.
Okay,
If anyone has any
perfect.
questions.
Yes, if you have any questions, if you'll drop them into the Q&A, and then Christy will help us facilitate those.
Great, thank you.
And I'm going to switch gears off the screen and put our survey on the screen. So if you guys choose to complete the survey, we really and truly appreciate your feedback. I know someone asked in the chat, are there any plans to conduct these kind of sessions geared towards teens for teens to attend? That's a suggestion that we'll definitely take into consideration. Our department is very much about hearing what our community needs and trying to adapt to those needs. And so if you can take a minute and just complete the survey, that would really help us ensure that what we're sharing is what you guys need. So, and you can also be put into a prize drawing for a copy of the formula. So that is on the screen if you guys want to take a minute to do that.
We have a few questions, so I'll go ahead and jump on those real quick. How do we deal with a teenager who thinks mom doesn't know much to help me?
Okay. So that's hard as a mom because they've shifted from in this younger developmental stage where they were more open to our ideas and feedback. And as teens, they are and it's developmentally appropriate that they want to try to figure it out on their own. And so I would go back to what I said about trying to frame it as you and your teen working together against the problem, because they may think, well, mom doesn't know how to solve this problem. And the truth is, really, they have more information than you do. They are the ones who are in the class or in the cafeteria at lunch or at the party. So if you can really try to brainstorm alongside them rather than telling them how to fix it, sometimes that helps them be a little more open. Other than that, you can just hope that eventually they will listen. Sometimes they are listening and they are not going to say, thank you so much for the valuable information, mom, but they may hear it anyway.
All right. The next one is how to build resilience in teens.
Yes. How to build resilience. So one way that is hard, and I acknowledge this is hard because I'm a mom. If you can identify a way to let them experience failure, and especially if they can do it when the stakes are fairly low, when it's like, okay, they forgot their homework, they're going to get a 0 on homework, let them experience that and realize, oh, I got through that. My grade may be affected, but the world didn't end, and I can turn it in maybe tomorrow and get some credit. Let them deal with the failure. And then they realize, okay, I can survive hard things. So it's hard to do. It goes back to, you've probably all heard of, the helicopter, the snowplow parent. We all want to prevent our child from suffering, but they build resilience by experiencing hard things and experiencing them by getting through them with as much of their own resources as they can. Sometimes they do need help. I see breathing is one way to regulate. Any other ideas? Yes, there are wonderful resources out there on ways to regulate. There's a resource on Robin Gobbel, Gobbel's website, and it's a free downloadable. Has nothing to do with Grant Halliburton, so I'm just offering this outside of the Grant Halliburton website. But it's a free downloadable that gives a whole page full of ideas. Taking a walk, having a glass of water, bouncing a ball, petting your dog or cat, hanging out with an animal is a great way to bring us back into regulation. Getting out in nature. Science is showing more and more that our kids don't get a lot of time in the natural world, and that really helps shift our perspective and regulate us. So, yeah.
All right. And the next one, she's asking for counseling with you, and they're looking for a counselor.
Sure.
And if you can give any recommendations.
Yes. So, I want to be clear that I'm here as a presenter for the Grant Halliburton Foundation. I'm here as a volunteer mental health professional, but I do counseling in a private practice in Plano. My name's Holly Martin, and there are several counselors at the practice where I'm at. You can, my practice is called Nova Cesta, Nova Cesta counseling. So you can look us up online. We have a website. There are many other excellent counseling practices in the Allen, Plano, McKinney area. And I imagine your counselor at your school probably has a list of referrals. Is that true, Christy?
Yeah, I think most counselors would have that. Yeah.
Would have a list of people who work with parents and teens. So absolutely.
All right. Let me get out of this. We have some questions over in the chat. Let's see. How do we manage the attitude?
Okay, well, on that one, I will go back to regulate, relate, reason. Because if you can remember that when they are dysregulated, there is no managing the attitude. When they are dysregulated, there is only trying to bring them back into their wise mind. But I do think there's a place for, if they are consistently being disrespectful to you, without elevating the conflict, if you can invite them to try again. And it is okay to set some boundaries around that. Say, hey, it's really not okay to talk to me that way. I'm going to give you another chance. Maybe you've had a hard day. I'm going to give you a take 2 on that response. I'm going to give you a do-over, whatever language fits in your family. If you're a golf family, how about a mulligan? Try that again. Give them a chance to say something in a more kind and respectful way.
All right. Let's see. My son is on the high-skilled autism spectrum. Do you think it could take longer for him to cope with his emotions?
Yes, absolutely. Any child or teen who is on the neurodivergent spectrum probably does have some amount of delay behind what we would consider the average developmental stages. And so, yes, a child on the spectrum may have more difficulty regulating their emotions. They may have more intense emotions. But I also just want to offer a lot of hope for that, because neurodivergent teens also can be so beautifully empathetic and kind. So even though they may not fit into a typical mold that people might be expecting, they can have such beautiful gifts. And there's a really good, I believe the name of the podcast is Tilt Parenting. I think I'm remembering that correctly. I could be wrong, but it is all about parenting neurodivergent kids and teens and has some really great resources for that.
Right. And I don't think we have any other questions right now. Looks like all of them for now.
Thank you guys so much for having me today. It was really a joy to be here.
Thank you. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Sorry, my mute button wouldn't unmute. Yes, we are so appreciative. There were a lot of really positive comments in the chat. This is our second Grant Halliburton presentation we've put out there this year, and both have been really, really, really good. So thank you so much. I understand that this is a volunteer thing that you do, and it's definitely a great service to our community. So we appreciate you. And folks, if you have any more questions, please feel free to send them our way. If you want to complete that survey, please go ahead and do. I apologize. I know exactly what happened. I thought Christy and I made the same form, and I deleted mine, and that's all me. So it's restored. You should be able to complete it now. And our next session coming up, I believe, is February 19th. And we're going to focus on unlocking academic success. So thanks again for joining, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Holly. Take care.
Thanks. You too. Bye-bye.